learn to use Django with 6 different Google APIs in this course from Bobby Stearman.
Hey everyone, it's Bobby from Dig Coding here, and in this course I will be walking you through and showing you how to build a Django app that uses 6 different Google APIs. So let's start with the walkthrough. If you look at my screen, you can see that I've got the app open already on the sign in page. So if we click on sign up, because we don't currently have a user account, let's put Bobby Stearman, and we'll have a username. This must be an email, bobby@diddemo.com. Password, I will use fredfred1. Confirm password, fredfred1. We have also got a show passwords toggle. It converts a password input to a text input. So you can see they match. If I click sign up, when I click sign up, we will be using the reCAPTCHA version 3 software. This is a Google product that scores a form submission, and the higher the score, the more likely it is that it's a real human being that is actually submitting the form. It's great. The fact we've got this element in the bottom right of the screen would suggest that the software is working. So let's sign up. Should get a message that says thank you for signing up, and will then be redirected to the user account page. The user can then update their profile with an address, and this is where we're using the Google Places API. So it is predictive. So as I type into the input, Google will predict the address in the country that is predefined in settings.py and give you a number of different addresses that meet the search. So let's go with 123, and that's coming up with a few different addresses. Let's go 123 Victoria Street. As I click it, it will pre-populate some hidden inputs, and then I have the option to update. Your profile has been updated. Okay, so that's one of the APIs. The other one is in root. So this app will allow you to put a starting point, so an origin, a waypoint 1, a waypoint 2, and a destination. And when we submit this, or actually when we finish the 4th input here, programmatically it will create a parameter string and redirect us to a different URL, and it will render the map. So let's add a few addresses. So we'll go with 1 High Street, Sutton, Ely. Then I'll have another one, 1 High Street, Haddenham, Ely. So this is all around my local area. Then we'll go 1 High Street, Streatham, Ely, and then lastly we'll do 1 Marketplace, Ely. There we have it. When I click this, it will then say, right, you have completed all 4 waypoints. And if you look at the top here, it's creating a fancy parameter string, but the URL is map. So it shows the start and destination, longitude and latitude, the duration from the origin to the destination, the distance between origin and destination, and then it will render a map, which is brilliant. And if I then click here for directions, it will then unhide some elements in the HTML, and it will show you every single step that is required from the origin to the destination. So that is the application that I've built. This is the one that we're going to go through in this course. I will go through every single step that is necessary, right from enabling APIs at Google and reCAPTCHA, starting a new project, building the back end, building the front end, and fully testing the application. So without further ado, let's jump into section 1. Hey everyone, it's Bobby from Dig Coding here, and in this segment we will be setting up 2 Google API keys. These API keys will allow us to interact with 6 Google APIs. The first one we'll be looking at today is something called Google reCAPTCHA. Now this is software that stops malicious software from interacting with your website. So essentially it keeps the riffraff out and allows real human beings to submit forms. Now you will have come across this before on other people's websites. you will complete a form, and when submitting that form, you'll be presented with 9 images and asked to select any image that may contain a bus or a plane or a motorcycle. And if you select the right images, you can then submit the form. That is a challenge-based form submission, and this is version 2. We won't be using version 2 today, we'll be using version 3. Now this is not challenge-based. Instead, Google scores each form submission against certain criteria. Now the higher the score, the higher chance it is that it is a real live human being submitting the form and not some malicious software. So that's what we'll be setting up today, and after that we will then go to Google Cloud and we'll be setting up another API key that will allow us to set up and enable 5 APIs: places, directions, distance matrix, geocoding, and maps JavaScript. So let's jump straight into it and set up reCAPTCHA. So if you look on my screen, it opens up on google.com/reCAPTCHA/about. On this page, you will find all the information that you need to find out a little bit more about reCAPTCHA, about what it does, some use cases, and also the history, because it has evolved over the years. When on this site, ensure that you've got a Google account. You will need one. Click on the V3 admin console. You can see here that I've got 6 sites. I've been using this for some time, and a lot of my clients like to use reCAPTCHA. But whether or not you've got this set up on your machine already, you do need to follow this process. So you need to click the little plus button here, which is to create a new site. So let's create a site, and we will call it Google Django tutorial. We will then click on reCAPTCHA version 3. Again, it says verify request with a score. This is what we want. Version 2 verifies request with a challenge. So we'll click on version 3, and then you need to add the domain. So we're doing this in a development environment. So it's on my local machine, and we'll be using Django. So the domain in this case is localhost. You don't need to put the port. Have I spelled that right? No, I haven't. Localhost. And then click accept and submit. There we have it. So it creates a key and a secret key. Now, working with APIs, if you've done this before, you will know, but if you haven't, I like to look at the API keys as this. An API key is the equivalent of a username. An API secret key is an equivalent of a password. Just try to keep them secret, because you don't want people getting hold of your keys and making calls fictitiously. So let's copy the site key. I like to just dump these in a notepad so I can use them later. I've got one open here. So reCAPTCHA_key equals, and we'll paste in the key back to the website. We'll copy the secret key, and we'll dump that here as well. You can see here I've got another one called Google equals. That's the API key we're now about to set up. That is all we need to do to set up reCAPTCHA. The rest is done in the code in Python, or in this case, the Django web framework, which we'll be setting up in the next segment. So we'll continue now, and we will set up the Google API key that will allow us to work with places, directions, distance matrix, geocoding, and maps JavaScript. What you need to do is visit the website cloud.google.com, and this is the website. You will need a Google account. You can see I've got my icon there, my logo. I'm set up as dig coding. When set up on Google, you need to click on console, and it will take you to your console home, and then you need to set up a new project. So if you just see, look what I did there on here, just click the pull down list, and then you can set up a new project, and we will call this Google Django tutorial. Click create. And then when it's finished doing that, you can then select the new, oh, it's just doing its magic. It'll only take a second. Okay, that's complete. So now click the project that we just set up. And this is the new Google Django tutorial home. You now need to click on APIs and services. When in there, You do have the option to click Enable APIs and Services, but first off, we need to click on Credentials. We need to set up the API key. Click on Credentials. This will be an empty blank slate. We now need to click on Create Credentials. This will allow us to select different options, but the one we want today is API key. Click on the API key. There we have it. Copy the API key and save that in the notepad. There we have it. And back to the website, close. Now we haven't named it. We can name it by clicking this little pen here to edit the API key. And in here you can restrict the API key to certain IP addresses, change the name, which we will. This is Google Django tutorial key, and save. By the time you see this tutorial will be dead, i.e. it will be removed from Google, so there's no risk here. That is the key. We've set up the key now. We now need to enable the APIs. So if we go into the dashboard again, this option here, so plus enable API services, click there. And because maps are the most popular API service that Google provide, it's right at the top. Click on view all 17. There's quite a few of them. If you scroll down, there's a whole bunch of different APIs here. The first one that we need to look at is Places API. I won't go through what each of them do specifically, but each of these, in your own time, click on them and it gives you an overview of exactly what they do. Now, Places will be using that to pre-populate addresses when creating an account in our project. So you'll start typing an address and it will predict what the address is that you're looking for, and you can just select it and it pre-fills all of the address, the town, the city, the county, the postcode, and so on and so forth. And you can always pull from that the longitude and latitude, which is very, very helpful. So let's click Enable. That will take a second. And now that that's completed and enabled, we now need to look for the Directions API. So you can go back to the overview and click on Enable APIs and go back to the main dashboard. But because we've enabled one now, it then gives you some options of other APIs that you can work with. So let's look at Directions API. Click Enable. These next APIs, so the directions, the distance, the geocoding, and the maps JavaScript, these are the APIs that we're going to use when working out different routes and distances between two geo points, so two longitude and latitudes. So that is the Directions API. We now need the distance matrix. We'll enable that quickly. Some of them are quite self-explanatory, to be fair. The next one is Google geocoding. Well, lo and behold, that allows us to geocode certain points. So geocoding API will enable this. Lastly, we need to find the Maps JavaScript API and enable that. And that will allow us to write some JavaScript to actually make the calls themselves, because we won't be making API calls from Django. The calls themselves will be handled in JavaScript. So let's click the Maps JavaScript API. Enable. There we have it. So just to recap, in this segment we have created two API keys. One of them is with Google ReCAPTCHA version 3. This will allow us to ensure that real human beings are submitting forms on our project and stop the riffraff from submitting those forms. And then we've created another API on Google Cloud and enabled Google Places, Google Directions, Google Distance Matrix, Google Geocoding, and Google Maps JavaScript APIs. This will allow us to have our users complete or start typing their address, and it will predict where they live, and they can select an address. And also they can then add two different points, so two locations in any given country, and our project will then calculate the route and distance between those points. Okay, that's the end of this segment. Thanks for watching. Let's start setting up the project in the next segment. Thank you. Bye-bye. Hey everyone, it's Bobby from Decoding here, and in this segment I'm going to show you everything that you need to do to start building this Google API app. So we will be using a Python web framework called Django, and we'll be working through how to start a new project, how to create an app, how to configure some settings and static files such as CSS, JavaScript and images, and also playing around with the URL conf. Now, if you're familiar with Django, you will know what that all means. However, if you're an absolute newbie, I will just show you quickly a little bit about Python and Django and a library that we'll be using, which is virtual env wrapper-win in my case, because I'm using a Windows machine. So if you look at my screen, I've got the Python website open on their downloads page. If you haven't got Python downloaded on your machine, you will need to do it. I do have a link to a video that's at the top of the screen now that will show you exactly what you've got to do to install Python and also configure a library called virtual env wrapper, and that is this page here. So it's on a repository in pypi.org. Like I say, look at the video, walk through all of those steps, get Python installed in your machine, get virtual env wrapper installed in your machine, and you'll be good to go. The third tab here is the djangoproject.com website. So this is Django Web Framework. So it says here that Django makes it easier to build web applications more quickly with less code. That is exactly what it does, and that is what attracted me to Django about 5 or 6 years ago. I've been using it for quite some time. It's easy to learn. The documentation is absolutely fantastic, and they've got quite a good tutorial on their actual website. All you need to do is click on the Get Started with Django link here, and away you go. But that's what we'll be using in today's segment to get started. So what we'll do, we'll start off by opening up a command prompt. And if you've already set up virtually env wrapper, then you can start using certain commands. That's why I asked you to follow that video, because if you hadn't set up virtually env wrapper, then you wouldn't be able to use the same commands that I'm going to use today. So what I'll do straight away, I will cd into my development directory. And what I will do is I'll set up a new virtual env. And the way you do that is mk virtual env, and then with a space, you then name this env. So we'll call this the same as the project. So we'll go did Django Google API tutorial. Okay, click enter, and that will do all of the necessary configuration on your machine, and it will set up a virtual env. So what I'll do, I'll show you quickly what that has just done. So if I click on my directories here, if I go into my own, sorry, if I go into Bobby, which this is the default configuration, it will set up an env file in your user directory. So you can see here that I've got envs, and I've just set up did Django Google API tutorial. If I open that, open lib, site packages. These are all of the site packages that Python will need to work. So these just come straight out of the box. So when you set up a virtual env, this is what you get. We will then be installing Django and a few other libraries, and they just get added. Every time we pip install a library, it gets added into our virtual env. So that's what we've just done by adding, by using make virtual env. Go back into our command prompt, and what we'll now do is we will pip install Django. And if I press enter whilst that's, so I probably glossed over that, but the command pip is essentially, it's a standard package manager, and it allows you to install and maintain packages for Python. So we use pip install to install certain packages from public repositories such as pypi, and I've just pip installed Django. If I go back into my env directory that I was showing you a moment ago, you can see now that we've got Django package here. And within Django, it comes straight out of the box. It comes with a whole bunch of different directories and models and views and all sorts. And that is essentially how Django works. So we'll be making calls, creating models, creating views and forms, and it all interacts with these directories and files here. So we've now got a virtual environment all configured and Django installed. We can now start a new project. So you need to type Django-admin and then call start project. And then you need to name the project. So we'll call it exactly the same as the development environment or virtual environment, sorry. Did Django Google API tutorial. Okay, that should have done it. So if I now open up my directory again, there we go, Bobby, development, and in here we've got did Django Google API tutorial. Open that up, and this is what comes straight out of the box. We've got a manage.py file, and then we've got the main conf directory here. And in there you've got settings, URLs, you've got ASCII, you've got WSGI, and you've got an init, well, a dunder init file there. So that worked very, very well. We now need to create our first app. So Django will allow us to have numerous apps running within a project. So what we need to do is open our command prompt back up, and we now need to cd into did Django Google API tutorial. And now that we've got the project there, we can now access the manage.py file. And that is the manage.py file that is in the main project here. So we make a call to manage.py. So we say Python manage.py start app, and we'll call this one main. Okay, great. If I open up my directory again, we now have an app in here called main, and straight out of the box it comes with a few files. So you have an empty migrations directory. That is what's used when we're creating models and you migrate those models to a database. We've got an admin file, an apps file, we've got models file. This is where you house all of the models for the project, tests and views. We'll create one or two other files, but this is what comes straight out of the box. We're now at a point where we can start writing some code. To do that, we will need a text editor. I use Sublime Text, but there's so many different text editors out there. Use the one that you like the best, and then you can start coding. So what we'll do, we'll open up Sublime Text in our directory that we just created, did Django Google API tutorial. So there we have it. This is the project in Sublime Text. You can see we've got a manage.py file here. We've got the main project directory, which we can open up and you can have a look at these files. And then we've got the main app that we've got here. We will be focusing our time in settings.py and urls.py today, which is the URL comp file. So we'll open up settings.py first and foremost. And if I scroll down, you've got a whole bunch of code here that comes straight out of the box with Django. This is very, very standard. We do, however, need to change some of this code, and that's what we're going to do right now. So at the top of the settings.py file here, you have from pathlib import path. That is required, but we also need another import. This is import OS for operating system. This library allows us to access things like environment variables. Okay, and we'll scroll down a little bit further. If we were building this in a production environment or for a production app, then I would do something with a secret key here. I would use a library such as Django decouple to remove sensitive information from the project. But as we are not doing anything like that, and this is just a tutorial, I will just leave that as it is. So if you scroll down further, again, with allowed hosts, that is something more for production. You've then got installed apps. Now these are the installed apps that come straight out of the box, but we have created an app here called main. Now if you look in apps, the name of this is main. Okay, so that's what we need to reference in settings.py. So if we enter a couple of times, just add a little bit of white space, just add a string called main, and then a comma, a trailing comma. So that is telling Django that the app that we've just created is actually included in the project. Then if you scroll down a little bit further, we've got middleware. We won't be playing with that here, but there are some libraries that we require or other applications require, and they do need you to have some middleware alterations. Root URL conf, don't need to change that. Templates, we won't be changing that. WSGI application, no change with database either. Now, if I was to make this app for a production application, I would probably use a database such as PostgreSQL, but we would just be using the database that comes straight out of the box. It's no harm in that at all. Language code, it defaults to EN US. I am in Great Britain, so ENGB. And then at the bottom here, we've got a variable here called static URL. Now, we will be creating this app and it will be looking fantastic. To do that, we need to be using files such as cascading style sheets, so CSS and JavaScript, so JS files, and also images such as logos and things like that. So we do need to configure static files in settings.py. And how we do that is we add a variable called static files underscore does, and this is a list. And in here we call the OS library that we've just imported, path, which was also imported at the top of the page, and then we join. And we join the base directory, and we call it static. That is the only change we need to add here for static files does. The static URL remains the same, but we also need one in here called static root. There we go, and this is os.path.join. Then bracket, and then this is again base dir, but this one is static cdn. Okay, they are the only changes we need to make to settings.py in regards to static files. You need these variables for it to work and serve CSS and JavaScript files to the project, to the front end. I won't do any more of a deeper dive than that. We do now need 3 more variables. The first one will be called Google API key. We'll have that as an empty string for now. We need reCAPTCHA. Call that reCAPTCHA key, again empty, and then we'll have reCAPTCHA. Call this secret key. Secret key. There we go. And what I'll do, I'll open up the notes that I made in the last segment. And we need, oh, it looks like I didn't save the secret key, but we will get that. We'll save that there. This was the Google API key. There we have it. And the secret key I'll have to get from reCAPTCHA in a couple of moments. In fact, let's do that now. reCAPTCHA. And one of the sites that we would do, it was this one here, Google Django. And I believe if we go into settings, keys, there we have it. Right, okay, we copy the secret key, go back into our project, and we save that in the reCAPTCHA secret key. There we go. That is settings.py file complete. We don't need to do any more configuration in there. The next change is in urls.py. And what we need to do in this file is we need to, after path, we need to bring in include. We need from Django.conf. Now, when I'm referencing Django directories, I'm quite literally referencing them in the env file. So we'll go back in here, lib, site packages. Remember when we were setting up the virtual environment, if we now go into Django and in the project here, Django.urls, we go into Django and go into URLs, we're referencing these files here and functions and classes within these files. That is exactly what we're doing. That's how we're importing them into the project, okay? So from Django.conf, import settings. So we're now importing, amongst other things, everything that we've got in this file here. Then from django.conf.urls.static import static. That looks right. Okay, so we need to. Django comes with an admin page already straight out of the box, but we do need to add another path here, and that will be to our main app URLs. That we haven't added that file yet, but we will reference it now. So it's path, and what we need to do is use that include that we've just imported, and it's main, and we'll have a file in that main app called URLs, and then we'll use namespace equals, this will be called main. Wonderful. They're the URL patterns that we need. We also need one other setting in here for the static files, and what we do is if settings.debug, now we're referencing debug, which is in settings.py at the top, so it defaults to true. So when in development, when debug is true, when you have a problem with your code, it will come up with the error on the screen, which is very handy, but you don't have you would not have debug set as true in production. So if it is set to true, which it currently is, then we need to add to the URL patterns. And how you do that is URL add equals static, that is the library that we've got here. And then we want settings dot static URL, and then we want document root equals settings dot static root, and that is it. So the settings dot static URL, that's what we set up in the settings.py file, so the static URL. And the static root is also this one here that we set up as well. So we have now set up the settings.py and the URLs conf file correctly, and that should now work. One last thing before we close off this segment, and that is we're referencing a URL file that is not there. So if we go into main, new file, and we'll call this urls.py, we will create the necessary list that is required for URL conf. So we'll say from Django.urls import path from dot, so this will be referencing a views file, which is here, import views. So we'll be importing everything from views. App name. So this is what we called the app in as a namespace in the URL conf. Main, and then we want URL patterns equals, and that's an empty list. We will add to that in another section. Okay, so just to recap on what we've gone through today, we have set up a new Django project, we've created a new app, we have adjusted the settings.py file, we've configured static files in the settings and URL conf, and we then added the URL patterns in the URL conf as well. So we are now good to go. We are ready to start coding this application, and we'll be doing that in the next segment. So thanks for watching. See you soon. Bye. Hey everyone, it's Bobby from Decoding here, and in this section we'll be following on where we left off from the last one, where we started a new Django project. In this section we will be fleshing out the back end. What I mean by that is we'll be creating some models, or one model actually, and it'll be a user profile model that extends the built-in user model that comes straight out of the box of Django. The reason we're doing this is because we want our users to have the ability to sign up and sign in and create a profile. This is how we will be using the reCAPTCHA API and the Google Places API. Okay, we'll also be creating some forms, some views, some URLs, and some mix-ins for the views. Those mix-ins will essentially help us make our code look a little bit easier to read, and those mix-ins will be recyclable. We can use them in other apps as well, which is great. And then we'll also be creating the template directories. So this will be regarded as the back end. In the next section, we'll be looking at the front end, which is all about HTML files, CSS, so cascading style sheets, and JavaScript. So without further ado, let's jump straight into it. You can see on my screen here that I've got 4 tabs open, all of them on docs.djangoproject.com. Like I said in the last section, the Django documentation is second to none. And I wanted to just go through this quickly because we are working with models, we're working with signals, model forms and views. So for those that are absolutely, well, they're newbies at Django, this is going to be quite helpful. So what is a model? A model is a single definitive source of information about your data. It contains the essential fields and behaviors of the data you're storing. Generally, each model maps to a single database table. So models translate to database tables. Like I said in the last video, we'll be using SQLite. That comes straight out of the box of Django. You can upgrade to something like PostgreSQL, but we're not in this app. So when we're building our user profile model, we'll be using things called model fields. And the most important one, we'll be using char fields and float fields and things like that. But the most important one that we're using is the one-to-one field, which links the user profile to the built-in user model, which comes straight out of the box of Django. And we'll be creating the user profile using signals. So that's models. Very, very quick top-down view of models. And by all means, have a good read of these docs pages when you have a bit more time. Signals. So we'll be creating a signals.py file. This will be handling the logic of creating the user profile when a user is created. So we'll be using post save and a receiver decorator to do that. But I'll show you what that all means when we get into it. Next, we've got model forms. So we are creating a model form. So this will be a model form linked directly to the user profile model. We will also be creating 2 other forms. These forms will inherit from some built-in class forms that Django has straight out of the box. One of them is a user creation form and the other one is an authentication form. These forms handle the logic of signing up and signing in perfectly. So it just means that we haven't got to handle all of that logic. We can just call form.save and it does all of that in the background, which is great. Django is all about getting as much output with as little input as possible. So if we can get away with using some built-in models and classes and forms and things like that, we will. So yeah, like I say, we'll be using the user creation form to build a user form, and we'll be using the authentication form to build an auth form. And then we'll be looking at views. So we'll be creating class-based views and function-based views. I do find that some tutorials online focus on one or the other. And when you're new to Django, it can be quite confusing, especially if you've been focusing your attention on function-based views. Class-based views then look a little bit alien. So I'm doing a bit of both in this tutorial just to help you newbies out there. So let's jump straight into it. You can see that it's where we left it off. Yeah, okay. So if we open up our command prompt, you can see that I've got my virtual environment fired up and I'm in the correct file. Now we will be working with APIs, as you know, that's the whole point in this tutorial. And in Django, there's a great library called requests that help us out massively with API calls. So all you need to do to install it is use the pip command. So pip install requests. Great, and that will now be in our env file that I showed you 2 videos ago. Now what we need to do is start a new app. So we go Python, manage.py, start app, and we'll call this users. And that's great. If I now look in Sublime Text, you should now see a users directory, which is great. It's pretty much blank, but we'll start fleshing it out in a second. So the first thing we need to do when we start a new app is go into settings.py and register that app in the installed apps. So users, trailing comma. And there are a few other variables that we need in settings.py that I forgot about in the last section. So we'll do that now. I will be copying a lot of code from my other screen in this section because it will save a lot of time. It will make for a much shorter section, and I will hopefully be able to hold your attention for a little bit longer. So as we are using sign up, sign in, and sign out logic, we will add some variables in settings.py. There's a login URL, so this is where users will sign in. So we haven't created this URL yet, but we will in this section. We've got a login redirect URL, which is account This will act as the home page. Now, there will be a decorator, so a login required decorator on that view. So when somebody visits the home page or index page, it will redirect them to the sign in page. But that works for this app, so I've kept it in here. And lastly, we've got a logout redirect. So when somebody signs out, it redirects that user to sign in. So they're the three variables that we need in settings.py. And there's one last variable before we move on to the URL conf, and it's base country. So the JavaScript that I've got in this project uses a country code, and it uses that code when predicting addresses for the Places API. So you can change that to something like FR for France and other country codes, but it just means that we can change it in the settings without having to change it in the JavaScript. So now we need to go to the URL conf file and add users to the URL pattern. So we'll do that quickly. Just copy it down. There's no need to always type it from scratch, although it does help when learning Django. But my typing is terrible, so I tend to litter these apps with typos, and it causes a whole range of issues. So that is all we need to add into the URL conf file. That's saved, so is settings. So we'll close those. And now what we need to do is go into main URLs, and what we'll do, we'll copy this across to users into a new file. We'll change the app name to users, and we'll save this as urls.py because we're referencing that in URL conf py. There we have it. Okay, so now we're good to go. We are good to start the models now. So we are not creating any models in main. Main is going to be used for a few views such as root and map, and users will be handling all of the authentication logic. So we'll add the models in here. So if I just take my code and I will copy, and I'll quite literally dump it in here and then walk you through what I'm doing. So the from Django.db import models, that comes straight out of the box, and then we're importing user, which is the built-in user model that I keep talking about. So you will get used to writing this. So django.contrib.auth.models import user. I normally have that in every one of my views, so you get used to writing that quite a lot. We then have the user profile, which is a class, and you pass through models.model. In my models, I generally have a timestamp and an updated. This allows me to track when a model has been created. So we use the auto now add equals true, and the updated is auto now. So every time a profile is created, this will capture the date time, and every time a profile is updated, it will also create the it will keep updating this field with the new date time when it was updated. Then we've got user. This is the important one. This is the one-to-one field that I was talking about. You pass through the user model, and then you also have on delete equals models.cascade. If I move this across so you can read everything. So that means if the user was deleted, then this user profile would subsequently be deleted as well. So there's no profile in the database that isn't linked to an actual user. You can also have something like set null in there. So if the user was deleted, this would still be in the database, but it would be null. Next, whole bunch of char fields. We've left these, or these will be created as null. So null equals true, blank equals true, because users will add an address once they've signed up. So we have a char field for address, max length 100. You have to have that in there, a max length keyword, because otherwise it just won't work. Then we have town, county, postcode, country, longitude, and latitude. They're all populated when a form is submitted from the front end, which we will be looking at shortly. Capture score, that is the reCAPTCHA score. So when somebody signs up, we will be using the reCAPTCHA API to score the submission. The higher the score, the more likely it is that it is a real human being. That score is passed through and saved to this field as a float field. The highest you can get is 1.0, so it defaults to 0.0. Has profile is a Boolean field, so it's a simple true-false. It defaults to false, so when a user signs up, they do not have a profile. When they add an address and longitude and latitude, this will then be changed to true. Lastly, we have an isActive Boolean. I always have this in my models. It defaults to true, but it gives you the option to change this to false if ever you want to close a model down. And lastly, we've got a dunder-string function, pass through self, and we're returning an f-string self.user. Okay, so that is the model. Like I say, that translates straight to the database. So when we make migrations and migrate, that will become a database table. So that's our model. We now need to create some forms. So if I click new file and save as, and we'll call this forms.py. There we have it. So we've got 3 forms, a user form, an auth form, and a user profile form. So we're importing a few bits and pieces here. Let me make it a bit easier for you to see. So we're importing model form. Like I say, we've got a couple of built-in class forms that, that come straight out of the box, user creation form and authentication form. Again, we're importing the built-in user model, and then we're importing form from Django. And lastly, the user profile from models that we've just created. So that's all we need in this file. We've then got the first user form. This is inheriting the user creation form, okay? So what you need to do is create a few variables. So first name is forms.character field, so it's a char field, max length 30. This is exactly what the field is like in the built-in user model. In fact, let me start with the user profile form. It might make a little bit more sense. So this is just a model form, but they're more or less exactly the same. So address, you can see here, this address relates directly to the user profile address field. And again, it's a character field, which is the same as in the model. The max length is 100. That matches what the max length is in the model. So we try to keep model forms identical to what they would be in the model themselves. We've got required true, so this field must be completed for the form to be submitted. And then we use widget equals form, and this is going to be a hidden input. So the widget in a model form, that kind of translates through to HTML elements. So this will create a hidden input element, and it will be rendered through on the HTML file. So you could also have text input, you could have password input, you could have a whole range of different things, and you can also pass through things like classes and placeholders and things like that. And that's how we can change the way the form looks on the front end, because a very, very basic form from Django doesn't look too good unless you actually add some bits and pieces, such as classes and IDs and names, and then add some CSS. So this is the user profile form. Like I say, it's a model form. We've got address, town, county, postcode, country, longitude and latitude. They will be the input elements that will actually be hidden on the HTML file. Then we've got class meta. The model that we're linking this to is user profile, and then we have a tuple in fields with all of the field names. Okay, so that's the user profile. So I'll start there, and then it will make a little bit more sense when we look at user form. So like I say, it inherits from the user creation form. So the first name, very much like the user profile form, we're using a char field, max length is 30, because the built-in user model first name field has a max length of 30. Again, required true. And in this widget, it's a text input, and we're passing through as an attribute, placeholder is your first name. We're doing the same for last name, except we're changing the placeholder. The username is actually an email field in this case. So when somebody signs up, the username is an email rather than just a normal username. And then we've got password 1 and password 2. So in this, you can see we're passing through a class as well to the attributes. It's because we can then toggle between a password input and a text input. So there we have it. We are then adding a token field. So this will, for the reCAPTCHA token, it will be a hidden input, but that will be capturing the token when we're processing the form using reCAPTCHA version 3. Then we've got a meta class, model is user, and the fields are, as you can see here, they're the same as what we've got above. Then we've got the auth form. The auth form is a little bit shorter. We've got username and password, email field which with a text input, and a char field with a password input. And again, by inheriting from the authentication form, that means that when we call form.save, it does all of the logic in the background, which is fantastic. So these are all the forms. We don't need to mess around with them anymore. That is it for this project. We don't need any more forms than that. If I just open that up there, the next thing we need to do really is create the mixins. So let's go ahead and do that, and we'll add them to the main directory. So new file, and we'll save that as mixins.py. py. Again, I'll bring it straight from my other screen here and paste. Okay, there's some pretty, one of these is called directions. It's a function that we're going to be using to make a API call. So these are quite important. So we'll go through these. We're bringing through a few things from Django. One of them is, this is from URL lib.parse. We're importing URL in code. This is for a redirect function that I've got, which I'll go through in a second. But you can see we're importing requests because we'll be making an API call. And there's a few other bits. We've got JSON date time. We've got format time span for the directions API, and also JSON response because we're making a mix-in for Ajax. So this is the form errors function that I use. This is kind of the default that I use when I'm processing forms. So if I ever overwrite the form valid method there, and if there's an error, then we call the form errors, and it essentially returns a string of all of the errors that you can pass through to the front end, which is quite handy with Ajax. The next one is a function called reCAPTCHA validation, and we pass through the token. This is the API call to reCAPTCHA. So the token is passed through from the front end in the view, and we create a variable called results, and we're doing a post request to this URL. Okay, so it's google.com reCAPTCHA API site verify, and then we create a data dictionary. And in that dictionary, we pass through secret as a keyword, and this is the reCAPTCHA private key that we've got in our settings, and also the response we pass through as token. That is the API call. It's very, very easy. And then we return result.json. So we just sonify the response. And that's what we use when we're creating the views in a few minutes. This is a great function. So what this does, it uses the URL in code. But if you pass through parameters and a URL to this function, it essentially returns a string that can be appended to a URL. And the string will look something like color equals blue and size equals large. Okay, and that parameter string can go, you can have a whole range of different parameters in there, but it just means it can be appended to a URL, and then when redirected to that URL, you can do something with those parameters using request.get, and we are actually using that in this app. So that's a great little function that we use. So this is the Ajax form mixin that I've got, and this is kind of the default mixin that we use, although I do overwrite the form valid function quite a lot. But I've written this for Ajax calls, so we can Ajaxify form submissions. This means that on the front end, the HTML doesn't need to reload. So you submit a form, you get the response, and then do something with it, and you can change bits and pieces using JavaScript. So I've got this as a way of Ajaxifying Django forms. So we've got a form invalid method, and we've got a form valid, and both of them are returning JSON responses to the views that we will be using it in. And lastly, we've got the directions function, passing through args and keyword arguments. Then we've got a whole bunch of variables here. So from the keywords, we're getting lat A, long A, and a whole bunch of other longitude and latitudes. So lat A and long A, that's our origin. So that's where we start in terms of waypoints. B is where we end up. So this is our destination. And then we've got C and D. These are the waypoints. Now I've limited this to 2 waypoints, so in total you've got 4 different destinations, but there's no reason why you can't have more. It's just in this app we've got 2. So we've got a start, 2 waypoints, and a destination. And these 3 variables are using f string to create strings from these variables here. So that origin will look something like 57.1. 74.6, yeah, that would be the string for origin. Okay, same with destination, but with waypoints you can see we're connecting with a bar. Then we are using requests.get. So this is a get request, and we're saving this in a results variable. So we're making a get request to this URL, and then we're passing through a parameter dictionary. So we pass through origin, pass through destination, and the waypoints, and then lastly the key. So this is the Google API key that we looked at in the first section. Okay, directions. This is personifying the results and saving it in a new variable. If directions has a status of OK, then we work through this logic here, and then we return all of this. So it returns origin. So the origin is actually outside of the if statement there. So it returns them regardless. So if it's OK, we look for the roots and legs keywords in the JSON file. We won't go through that yet, but during this one of the sections, I might show you what the JSON response looks like. Then we stipulate a distance, a duration, and a root list here. And then we cycle through all of the legs, and then we keep adding and adding and adding the distance, the same with duration, and that's what we're passing through to the return statement here. The duration here, you can see actually that we're using the format time span to reformat the duration into something that we can actually do something with. Okay, so that is, or they are all of the mix-ins. We don't need to look at them in any more detail, but we will be using them in the views. So if we go back to users, in views, if I now copy all of my views. So we've got a few views here. Let me minimize them to make it a little bit easier on the eye. Like I say, I've got some class-based views and I've got some function-based views. These are the class-based views. This is inheriting from template view. You've got sign up view is also a class-based view, and we're using form view with the Ajax mix in. Same with sign in. Sign out, that's just a function-based view, and so is profile view. So it's a right mixed bag really, and hopefully you can understand the different logic. We're bringing in a whole bunch of bits and pieces from Django. So we've got render, redirect, reverse. We are using the login required decorator, so that stops people that haven't been authenticated from seeing certain things in views. In bringing in user, the built-in user model. We're then using login, logout, and authenticate. These are fantastic. It does all of the heavy lifting with the authentication of users. We're bringing in settings, JSON response, and then these are the built-in generic views. We've got form view, template view, and lastly, because we're using login required on a class-based view, we need to bring in method decorator. We're then bringing in, that's the wrong name, that needs to be tutorial. We're now then bringing in the mix-ins that we just built and the forms, okay? So let's start quickly with account view. This is the home view that it will be, and it's inheriting from the template view. So this is a template class view. We need to call the template name or create a template name variable and stipulate exactly where this, where we're going to render this view. And this is going to be in the users account.html. We haven't created that HTML file yet, but we will in the next video. Then, or the next segment. Then what we're doing, we're overwriting the dispatch method using the method decorator and passing through login required. So this little piece here, the 3 lines of code here, what that will do, that will stop anyone that hasn't been authenticated from seeing this view. And if they haven't been authenticated, because we've got this in settings.py, so we've got login redirect URL. Sorry, the login URL. It will be the user will be redirected to this URL. So if somebody goes to account and they're not signed in, they will be redirected to sign in. When they sign in and it works, they'll be redirected back to account. Okay, so that's how that works. So that's the account view. We've then got profile view, which is function-based view. What we're doing, we're creating a couple of variables. We've got user and user profile from request. The form is the user profile form, and we pass through instance equals user profile. These two here I will remove and I'll add at the top of the screen so they're kind of global. And we'll make that capital. So these are the default messages and results because we're Ajaxifying the forms. So this will be passed through if ever there's an error, and that will be shown on the front end. So as we're using Ajax to submit the form, we've got if request.isAjax, then we do something. Else, it's a get request, and then we pass through context, a context dictionary. So we've got form, which is the user profile form, and then we add a couple of keywords. So the first one is Google API key, and the second one is base country from settings, okay? And then we return render the profile HTML file, and we pass through the context dictionary. That's how you pass through context in a function-based view. Slightly different in a class-based view, but I'll come on to that in a second. But if it is Ajax, then the form is user profile form, and the data equals the post data from the request, and the instance is user profile. If the form is valid, you save the form. And remember when I said we were going to add, when we add a profile, we then toggle the has profile field to true. So that's what we're doing there. So once we've added the address and longitude and latitude, we then save has profile as true, and then we save the object again. We pass through success. The message is your profile has been updated. If it's not valid, we call the form error function that we created a moment ago. Then we create a data dictionary, result equals result, and message keyword is message. We pass that through back to the front end as a JSON response, passing through the data. Whistle stop tour of the profile view, but that is essentially how we are handling the setting up of a profile against an account. Then we've got a sign up view. Look, we've got Ajax mixin. Let me just bring this across a little bit. We've got the Ajax mixin, and we've also got the form view. So as it's a form view, you need to say what the template is that we need to render to, which is a sign up HTML. The form class is the user form that we built a moment ago, and the success URL can just be a slash. We are using Ajax to submit the form, and depending on the response we get from the back end, we will then redirect or not. So we won't be using the success URL actually, but you do need one because we're using a form view. Again, we don't need that. I've already got that at the top of the screen. Then what we've got is reCAPTCHA. So remember I said we pass through context in a function-based view like this. Yeah, as a dictionary. In a class-based view, you need to call the getContextData method. And then once you've called that, you then can add a keyword to context and return context. So we're adding reCAPTCHA site key to the context, and that is the key in settings. And then we overwrite the form valid method in the Ajax mixin. And we do that because we need some new logic here because we're dealing with reCAPTCHA. So we call this if self.request is Ajax. So if this is an Ajax call, then what we do is we get the token from the clean data from the form. So this is the hidden input that we had in the form. Then we call a reCAPTCHA validation function that we created in mixins, and we pass through that token. Okay. So depending on the response, if it is a success, then we sign that user up. Okay. So we save the form. Remember, it's the form has the user creation form, which does all of the heavy lifting, like I say. So we just need to save the form, and it creates that user and user profile with a signal. We save the email. So we save the username to the email field because we use an email as a username, and we save the profile, the object. Then with user profile, we save the capture score to the user profile capture score field, and then we save the user profile. So that's what we do. Lastly, we call login. Okay. So with login, you pass through a request, you pass through the object, which is the user built-in user model, and then this isn't necessary. If you're using something like all-auth where you've got multiple backends, then you need to stipulate what backend you're using, but you can have that in there anyway. It doesn't really matter. The result is success, and the message is thank you for signing up. We create a data dictionary and pass it through as JSON response. Okay, so that is the sign-up view. Sign in view, again, Ajax form view. Again, we do all of this logic like we did above. It's just slightly different because the templates are slightly different. We don't need to pass any context through, but we do need to overwrite the form valid. So again, very similar to above, just we've got the username and a password. And what we need to do is call user equals authenticate, and then we authenticate that user. If user is not none, we log them in. Okay, and if not, we then call the form error. So we don't necessarily need this because we are using the authentication form, but because we're also calling the form error, I've just left that in there. It's probably surplus to requirements, to be fair. But that is the sign-in view. And lastly, we've got a sign-out view, which is a function-based view, and all it's doing is logging out and we pass through a request. And then once it's logged out, you redirect to the sign-in page. They are our views. I am trying to fly through these, but be as detailed as I can so you actually understand the logic of what I've done here. Like I say, I've just identified in the sign-in view that it doesn't necessarily need to look like that. You could technically you could just use the Ajax form mixin and it will save the form. But one of the main reasons is that we can have this success message because the mixins, if you look on the mixin here, there is no message. It's very, very basic. Okay, next, URLs. At the minute, we've got bugger all in there, but what we need to do is copy and paste all of this. So we're importing the views that we just created. The app name is users, and in the URL patterns, remember, account is home. So it's a class-based view, so you need to call the asView method. So it's views.accountView.asView. You don't need to do that for profile because it's a function-based view. But normally, and I don't know why I've done that, but we'll go profile and underscore view. Normally on a function-based view, I do this, and I think that is the normal syntax. So we'll go back into view, we'll change that, else it won't like it. So go back into URLs and I'll save that. So the profile, views.profileView, you don't need to call asView because it is a function-based view and the name is profile. We've got sign up, sign in, and sign out. These are both class-based and this is function-based. So that's the syntax that you need, okay? So if it's a class-based view, you call the asView. If it's a function-based view, you don't need to. And they are our URLs. And we're already pulling from these URLs in the URL conf with this line here, okay? I've just noticed that I've forgotten something fundamental. So we need a signals.py file. So new file, save as. This will be signals.py. And what we need in here is all of this. So we're importing post save from signals, the user model. We need a receiver decorator. And we also need the user profile that we've created in models. So the receiver decorator needs post save and the sender to do anything. So the sender is user in this case. So what we're listening for is a signal from the user model. And the function is create profile. We pass through the sender, which is user, the instance of the user, created, and keyword arguments. If created, so if user is created, we then create a user profile. And the user, because it's a one-to-one field, equals instance. Okay, that's what we put in signals. But to make sure that it actually fires up when we fire the local server up, we need to go into apps and def ready pass through self, and we import users dot signals. And that's all we need to do. So these two lines of code will be responsible for firing up this signal. Okay, and now we need to focus on the main app. So if I go into here and look at the URLs, we'll do it ask about face. We'll do the URLs first. So main is just responsible for two URLs. One of them is root. This is where you will be adding the different addresses for your directions. And when you complete the fourth direction, it then picks up all four, redirects you to this URL, which is map. Okay, so then we'll go to view. Okay, so we're just looking at render, redirect, and reverse. We're importing settings, and that is wrong. There we go. And we just need directions. Remember that mixin we created earlier? Well, that is what we're bringing in here. And then we've got a function-based view. Both of them are function-based views. So def root, and we create a context dictionary here, and we pass that through to the root HTML file. Very, very basic view. It's not doing too much. Most of it will be, or most of the heavy lifting on that view will be done using the API and the JavaScript, which we'll come on to in the next section. So the last view that we're going to look at today is map. This is where we have our map and route and directions rendered. So this is the fun bit. So we will be passing through a whole bunch of parameters. So if you remember in our mixin, we've got this, the redirect params. that will be responsible for creating a parameter string that will be passed through to the main view. And it will contain all of these. So it will contain keywords such as lat A, lat B, long B, and so on and so forth. We know that lat A and long A are both the origin, the starting point. B is the destination, and C and D are the waypoints. Okay, we know that because that's how we created up directions, the function that is also in mixin. So we say that if there is a lat A, lat B, lat C, and lat D, then do this call of directions. Okay, else, so if somebody tries to visit maps without those parameter strings, it would just redirect them to main root. So it would go back to the root and say do it again. Okay, but if there is a lat A, B, C, and D, it will try to call directions from the mixin, and it just passes through the lat A, lat B, and so on and so forth. Okay, and that's what we built into mixins, if you remember. There we go. So these are the keyword arguments. So this is what we're passing through from the view. Lat A, long A, lat B, B, C, C, D, D. Okay, and that is the if, that is the else. So this will redirect, but if it doesn't redirect, then it will create a context dictionary. There's a lot going on here. We're passing through the API key, base country. This is all required for the API call that we're going to make, and it will all become clear when we start writing the JavaScript. Passes through all of the longitude and latitude and so on and so forth, plus it passes through the origin, the destination, and the directions, because we need that to render onto the HTML file, which is map.html. So they are the all of the views, they are the URLs, the models, and so on and so forth. That just leaves us with creating a templates directory. So we haven't got anything in there. There's a couple of ways of doing this. Now, if you're creating reusable apps, i.e. those sort of apps that you can upload onto PyPI so that other people can actually install them, then it's probably best for you to have templates in the actual app, so it's all contained in one. But as we're not doing that, you don't need to do that at all. All you need to do is add a directory in here, in the main directory, which will be new folder. We'll call this templates. And all we'll need is a new directory in there for users. And we'll need one in there for main. So when we're referencing main/map.html, we'll be looking for a file in here. If I save this as map.html, this view will be looking in main for map.html, so it'll be looking for that. That's how that works. The only thing is, this project isn't geared up to look for templates in that directory. We need to go into settings.py and tell it where to look. You do that by going into templates. You go into Daz, and all you need to do, because it's in the main directory, you need to put templates. And that is it. Okay. I hope that that was a good balance of firing through everything so you can get through it nice and quickly without skipping over kind of some fundamental stuff. We've covered a lot of ground. We have started a new user app. We've built a model, some model forms, some views, some URLs. We've reconfigured settings, the URL conf. We've configured templates. We've covered a lot of ground, but that is it. In terms of the back end, in terms of Django, this app is complete. It won't work, however, because we haven't got anything such as CSS, HTML, or JavaScript. That's what we're looking at in the next section. But one thing actually I've just noticed also is that in our settings.py file, we're referencing a directory that's not there for static. Now, that's an easy fix. New folder, and we'll just call this static. Great. That is our static directory, and that is what this is referring to. Okay, good. That is the end of this section. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I look forward to going through the next few bits and pieces. Thank you, and goodbye. Hey everyone, it's Bobby from Decoding here, and in this section we'll be following on from where we left off in the last one, where we fleshed out the back end of this Django project. In this section, we will be playing with the front end. So we'll be creating HTML files, CSS, JavaScript, jQuery, Ajax, and Google APIs. So this is the fun bit of the project, actually, because this is where all kinds of strings gets strung together. So without further ado, let's jump straight into it. If you look at my screen here, I'm open on the Django docs for template tags. Now I have created a video on my DeezCoding channel that does a deep dive on template tags and filters. So if you want to understand what they are, then by all means have a look at that rather than me going through this page. But we'll be working with a lot of template tags today. So have a read and have a watch and then come back, I guess. But let's jump straight into the Sublime text. This is the project where we left it off on the last section. You can see here that we created a static directory and a templates directory. This is what the last couple of 2 or 3 minutes of the last section, this is what we did. And we've got main and we've got users in there. So what we'll do now is we will create the first HTML file, and that needs to be in templates as a base. So new file, and we'll call this save as base.html. Okay, and I'm not going to write this from scratch because it will take forever. I didn't design this app to be kind of basic. You know, it looks pretty, it actually works. You could, it resizes, is responsive. So there's a lot going on. So what I'll do, I will quite simply copy and paste it all across, and I'll walk you through what I'm doing. Let's move this over here a little bit. So first and foremost, there's a template tag here which says load static. This is a template tag that allows us to access our static files. Now, static files, as configured in settings.py, are all going to be in this directory here as we're in development. However, if we were in production, then you would set up static files in a slightly different way and maybe have them served up to the project via an S3 bucket or something like that, or DigitalOcean spaces. So this load static template tag allows us to access files in static directory. We've got some basic HTML here. I'm not going to do a deep dive at all, but we've got this is the main. All these links here. These are my fonts. So we use Courier Prime at DeezCoding. We've then got a style sheet that we're referencing main.css. We'll be playing around with that in a second. So this bit here is calling a CDN essentially, and this is for Toaster. So we'll be using Toaster alerts to display messages from the back end. So if you remember in views, we've got this message defaults to there was an error and the result is error. Well, that's going to show a red Toaster message. If you don't know what it is, if I go back into my browser, I've got Toaster examples here. So this is a success top right, but we can have a bottom right, which I believe I've got in this project. Show toast, there you go. And you can have whatever you like in there. You can test, show toast, there you go, test. Okay, so that's what we're using in this project. Go back into the project here, go back into base. So that's the CSS that's required for Toaster, and we always stick that in the head. You've then got block extend head, so we use a block template tag. Okay, so this allows us to extend head scripts. So I've got some notes in here as well. Body. So we've then got nav. We're using an include template tag. We haven't even created this yet, so I'll do that now quickly. So new folder, and this needs to be called partials. And in partials, we need a new file called nav.html. Okay, so that will now be picking up from this one here. Go back in the base, and so this include template tag, rather than having all of the code that's going to be in nav.html, you use the include, and it kind of interjects that HTML element into it. Then we've got this div. So don't worry about these too much. The classes, I will be creating some CSS because I've named these specifically in a certain way so that it renders nicely and looks great on the front end. If you remember when we looked through the demo of the app, it looks pretty good, right? So we've then got include partials logo HTML. So let's create that I can't talk today. Let's create that quickly. New file, and we'll save that as logo.html. I'll bring across that code in a second anyway. Save, and then we've got a block. So these blocks allow us to extend certain parts of this base in other templates. It will make more sense in a second. And it's called content. So we've got block, extend head, block content, and we've got another one here, extend footer. So these are our footer scripts. So first and foremost, we're using something called jQuery. This is I believe the most popular JavaScript library, and it allows us to access things such as AJAX. So we can make an asynchronous form submission, for instance. We submit the form and we get the response, and nothing reloads on the HTML page at all. It's all done asynchronously. So that's why we need jQuery. But you can get this code from code.jquery.com and you get the most recent version. Then we've got the toaster JavaScript, which is all this. Again, you can visit this cdnjs.com and get the latest version from there. Then we've got a block for extend a footer. Again, it allows us to extend this part of this HTML into another document. And then lastly, we're referencing main.js. So there's 2 files in static that we do need. So new file, and we'll save this as main.js. That'll be a JavaScript file. And we'll save as again, and we'll call this main. Oh no, we won't. New file. Save as. This will be main.css. So there we have it. We've now got the main CSS and main JavaScript. So we're referencing them in base HTML. So even if we were to not put anything in those files, we're not going to come across any errors. And then we close off the body in HTML. So that is base HTML. We don't need to do anything else in that file. All we now need to do is create the documents that will be extending these blocks. Okay, so first one that we'll look at is the index, or in this case it will be account, which is in users. So we'll create a new file. This will be save as, we'll call this account.html. In fact, we'll save as, we need another one in here called profile. Save as another one in here called sign in as underscore. Save as another one called sign out. And whilst I'm at it, I will also do the map. So templates going to main. Oh, I've already got map in there, and we'll have root. Save. Good. Let me close some of these down. We've got far too much going on up here. It's a real bad habit I have. There we go. Right. So now what we'll do, we'll look at account. Okay. So this is our home page. So I will copy and I'll paste this across. So it extends the base.html. So it's extending this. Okay. That's another template tag that Django has. Load static. Okay, so we now access static again. We're not adding it, that doesn't necessarily need to be there, but it's not hurting anyone, so we'll add that. If I wanted to add a script in there, for instance, yeah, so we'd add script, you could then add something in there, but we're not, so we won't. But this is a block content. So this is the content that will be injected, if you like, into this section here. Okay, so block content. So block content, block content. Okay, so we'll just save this. So we've got H3 tag. As you know, it's a Django Google API course, and this is the user account. And then we've got a div, which is container. So we'll be referencing these classes in the CSS, but I'm not going to dwell too much on CSS. This is more about the APIs than JavaScript, so we'll quickly do that in a second. And then we've got H4 tag, so user account details, and then we've got a table, okay? And in that table, we've got a table head. It's got a head, and then a field, and then a blank field, so there's no header there at all. And then we've got a table body. And then for each row, so we've got username, request.user.username. So Django uses something called context processors to always pass through request to HTML. So you can always access request. Therefore, you can always access request.user and a field such as user.username. You can access things like, in our case, it would be request.user.userprofile.address, things like that. And make queries such as if request.user.is authenticated. So it's really, really handy. That context processor is used more than anything else. The next row, we've got name. And then we've got, so we're using a filter. So this is a template filter, request.user.firstname title. So this will put a capital letter at the front of the name, and then space, last name. So first name, last name. And then we're doing an if statement here. So an if else. So if request.user.userprofile.hasProfile. So if they've added an address, display this, which is a table row, details or address, and then it will show address, town, county, postcode. Else, so if they haven't, so if they're just newly signed up, then it will show user profile and it will have an A tag with a href and a link. So we're using a URL template tag to user's profile. So it will just be a hyperlink where they can click it and it will take it to the profile so they can then select their address. So this is why I've got that has profile in as a field on the user profile model. That's it. That's all what's going on in account, not much else. So let's build out the profile. Paste and save. There's a bit more going on in this. Again, it extends base, got load static. Then we've got the block content. So again, this is the block. Then we've got extend footer. So if we remember in base, we've got this extend footer here. The main JS is always the last JavaScript that we load. That's just the way I do it. That means that anything above this I can reference. So I can definitively know that any Ajax that I'm writing in main.js, it will work because jQuery is loaded first, okay? And the block extends footer, this is all loaded before main.js. So I can actually reference any variables that are stated in the extend footer block. So in profile, we've got extend footer, and then we've got a script. So this is a JavaScript script, and we're creating two variables. One variable is Google API key. If you remember, we're passing this through. Let me remind you. Profile view. In context, we're passing Google API key and base country through to the context. That's how we're accessing it here. Okay. So we'll create a JavaScript variable so we can access this in the main.js file. We're calling it Google API key. And we're using the safe filter, so that will just create a string of that API key. Same goes for base country. The next script is a file called googleplaces.js. We haven't got that yet, so we will create that now. So it's Google Places, save as API.js. Great. Go back in the profile, so that's now referencing a file that is there. That will work. Go into the container. So this is the main bits and pieces. So we've got an if statement here with an else. So if the request.user.userprofile has profile, show all of this. Else, add address. Okay. End if. Okay, so we have got end if. Right. Okay. Just trying to figure out what I've done here. So this is input Google address. Right, okay, so this here that's the main input for the Google Places API. So this input here is the input where the user starts typing an address and Google API predicts what they're trying to type, and then it returns the address. They select it. When they select it, it then populates all of these inputs here, which I'll show you what I'm doing in a second. Let me just cover this off first. So if they have a profile, it will display the profile. Okay, so it'll display the address, and then it will have a change address, and then it will have, or else it'll have add an address. So if it changes the address, you can then change the address to the new one. You'll type away, and any address you select, it will change. If not, you just add an address. So this is the main input. You can see here we've got name, Google address, ID is ID Google address. We will be referencing them in the Google Places API, just for reference. Then we've got a form, and then that is the end of that really. So we'll look at this form. So the idea is profile form. We will be creating an Ajax call using jQuery on that. So that is the name we'll be referencing, profile form. the method is post, and the action is /profile. So that's essentially the URL we will be firing the Ajax call to, which is, if we look in the URLs, it's here. So it's the profile is the name, and that is assigned to views.profile view. Okay, so let's look at a form. So as it's a form, we need to use another template tag, and this will add a hidden input with a CSRF token. So CSRF token means cross-site request forgery token, and it's a token that's applied to a form. So when you submit the form, it knows that it is actually you doing it and no toe rag doing it from somewhere else. And what we're then doing is we're creating these labels. So address is actually, no, these are hidden, right? So the class is hidden L, and it's hidden. Okay, and the reason we're doing this is because in the JavaScript, in the main JS, we write a function to display these hidden elements when we select an address. And this is why we're doing it. So the label itself is hidden, class hidden L, and it's hidden. And form.address, if you remember, that is a hidden input. So if we go into forms, hidden input form. Sorry, hidden input. So all of these are hidden. So they will be rendered as hidden inputs in here, as is the label. So label and input hidden. Then you've got town, county, postcode, country, longitude, latitude. None of these will be displayed until the user selects the address, and then we've got a JavaScript function that will unhide all of these elements. The button to submit is disabled, so you can't submit the form until an address has been selected. And we add an ID to this profile button because we reference that and we programmatically click it when the address has been selected. Okay, so that's the profile HTML. Next, let's look at sign in. Okay, let me get my notes and sign in. Copy across, paste. Extends base, same as we load static, always the same. Then we've got the block content. Okay, not much else going on in this, but we've got a h3 tag and then we've got the container here. So this again is a form. Yeah, so again, CSRF token, the ID, sign in form, post, sign in. Okay, so I'm having the ID, the method, and the action always in the form as attributes. That way we can, when we're making the call in the JavaScript, it's a lot easier to understand what's going on. Label again, right, so we're creating a label. The difference is this isn't hidden, and the form.username. Because we're using a form view, you access the form from the form object. So it's form.username, and that's the input. So if you look at forms, username, password. Fields, username, password. That's how we're referencing them in sign in. Okay, so that's why we've got form.username, form.password. Then we've got label. So this is show password. So if you remember in the forms, we have got a class. Let me show you. Class password, okay. So what I'm doing in sign in is on click. So this is a little checkbox, right? So the CSS will make it look pretty, but essentially it's a checkbox. So if it's unchecked, it will be a password input. But when I click it, it becomes checked for starters, and it calls a function called show password or show p-word. Now this function I'm going to write in the main JavaScript file, and that will essentially swap that password input to a text input, so you can actually see the password, okay, which is quite standard on websites. And then the button is submit and sign in, okay, nice and easy. Next one, sign out. Sorry, sign up. No, that should be sign up, rename. There we go, sign up. So we will copy and we will paste. A little bit more going on in this one. So we're extending base HTML and we're loading static, pretty standard stuff. And this one we are extending the head. We'll come back to that in a second. We've got a block tag, we've got a form, and we're extending the footer. So if you remember in the sign up view, we're playing around with the context using the get context data method, and we're passing through reCAPTCHA site key, okay, which is the reCAPTCHA public key. And we're creating a variable reCAPTCHA site key that we can then reference in the JavaScript that we haven't written yet. Okay, The form is pretty standard, similar to what we just done. CSRF token. Then we've got the first name, last name, username, password 1, password 2. Difference is we've got token in this one. So the token, if you remember in the forms, we added as a hidden input, and that is how we're going to be handling the reCAPTCHA token. Okay, so that's a hidden input. You won't see that when it's rendered. Then we've got this little checkbox to show the password again, and a sign up submit button. Okay, so that is the form. And what we've got at the top here is a script. So this is the source is the URL https google.com reCAPTCHA API.javascript. So this is the JavaScript that we're putting straight from Google, and we're passing through the our reCAPTCHA site key. So that's how it knows that it's us making the call to reCAPTCHA, because the site key that we set up when we set up reCAPTCHA in the first section, we're linking it to that API key. So, and that is the JavaScript call. That's the script where we sit in the extend head. So essentially this script being in that extend head is the equivalent of it being in, well, it'll be there, but without the head. So imagine that, okay? So that's what we're doing by adding that to the extend head. So that's the JavaScript, that's the blog, that's content, happy days. That is the sign up page. So now let's look at the main map. Actually, let's look at the partials quickly. Copy, partials. Okay, so this is the logo. So it's just an A tag essentially. And if I save that, so if you click on the logo, it will take you to user's account, which is the home page, and it's referencing, I think this is the first time you've seen this in this tutorial, load static. So this is how you reference the static. When you load static, you can then use the static template tag. If you didn't load it, it wouldn't work. And we're looking in branding, so in static, new folder, branding, and it's trying to find a GIF, which is a did logo GIF. We'll add that in a second. Which won't be a problem at all. And then we will add the nav. Got a lot of if statements in this. Nothing too fancy, to be fair. It's got an if statement, if else. So if the request.user is authenticated. So if they're signed in, they will see this nav. If they're not, they will see this nav. Okay. So let's look at so when you first enter the site, if you're not signed in, you'll have if sign in path. So if the URL is sign in, then this will sign in will be active. Okay. So on the side nav, that'll be glowing up purple. If not, it will be blank. If it's sign up, it will be glowing up purple. If not, blank. That's what these if statements are doing. It's just basically showing whether or not it's active or not. If they are authenticated and the request path equals / which is home, again, active. If not, same goes with profile, route, map. Okay, so it just shows different different navigations, to be fair. Let's close that. Let's close that. Let's close sign up, sign in, profile and account. We'll keep base open. We'll close that. And now we will do map. So copy. Let's go into map. We'll paste this. A lot more going on in this. Save. Okay, so map. Extends the base HTML, load static. In this one, again, we're passing through reCAPTCHA. So reCAPTCHA site key. Okay. And then, to be fair, we probably don't need to. That's probably a hangover, but I'll leave it in there. Because we're not making a reCAPTCHA call in map. We're only making it in sign up. Okay, so we've then got a h3 tag and we've got a container. So what's going on here? We've got... I'm going... do you know what? Let's do root first. Let's do root first. Okay, this is root. Yeah, so root is the URL where we add the longitude and latitude for the origin, the waypoints, and the destination. And map is what's rendered. So that's the last point in time, actually. So let me look at root quickly. So I've just pasted that all in there. Extends base, load static, and then again we've got reCAPTCHA. We don't need that. I'm sure I can remove that, but I'm not going to because I haven't tested it, and I know that it works in the other project. But we're not technically making a reCAPTCHA call, so you know what, I'm certain that doesn't need to be in there. Okay, then we've got the h3 tag, and then we've got the inputs. So this is the same as account, no, profile. So in profile, if you remember, we had this input here, and we called it ID Google address. Difference here in root is that we've got 4. So if you look here, I've got ID Google address -A, -B. So remember, start and end. Don't ask me why I didn't go A, B, C, D. It seemed logical at the time, but looking back, I probably should have gone A, B, C, and D. Instead of gone A and B, that is point A, B is the destination, and the waypoints are C and D. I guess because you can do more waypoints, so it would be C, D, E, F, G that way. But hey, look, the logic was there when I was building it. So these are the inputs. So as you type in here, it will predict the address. As you type in C, it will predict the address, and so on and so forth. And when you select each of them, it then adds the geo coordinates, the longitude and latitude, to each of these hidden inputs here. So this class is geo, ID is lat A, long A, okay, and then it adds a value. I'll be using JavaScript to add that value. Yeah, we didn't need that recapture at the top of the screen because it's not even passing through the recapture key. So I can remove that from map as well. Let's remove that. There's no point in it being there. So save. Back to root. So this is the extend footer. So we've got a script here, a couple of variables, Google API key in the base country. And also we are then referencing the Google Places Waypoints JS because in this we have 2. So let's add another one and save as. And this was Google Waypoints, was it API.js? Waypoints API, let's have a look. I was probably wrong. Google Places Waypoints. Waypoints, and then if we delete that, there we have it. We've now got that file. So that's referencing a file that is actually there. Okay, so now we'll look at the final HTML document, which is map.html. So if we go in here, I did paste this a moment ago anyway, you can see that we've got quite a lot going on. This is where we render the map from Google. So let's look at the footer first. So we're passing through, if you look at the map view, in the context, we're passing through all of this. Okay, so we're passing through the key, the base country, the lat, the long, the da. In maps, we are getting all of those, and we're creating, in this case, we're creating a string. We're always using the safe filter, else JavaScript doesn't like it. And then we're creating variables, lat A, long A, and then B, C, D, origin, destination, and directions. We're going to need those in the Google Places API and the Google Places Waypoints. And also Google Maps JavaScript, which we haven't created yet. So new file, save as, Google Maps.js. Okay, so we'll be needing all of that in Google Maps. Okay. Then got another H3 tag, and we'll focus on this first before we look at the table in the container. So this is the map container, this is the map root. So we will be referenced in this ID map root because Google, the JavaScripts in the Google JS files that we're just creating, they will essentially be rendering the maps and everything else, all of the routing and stuff, into this element called a map root, and we'll be referencing map root in the JavaScript. Then if we look at the container, we've got another table. So we've got the start, the destination, the duration, and the distance. That's kind of the header of the table. And we're pulling from directions, origin, directions, destination. So that is what comes through when we call, if you remember when we've got directions here. So we're passing directions through to the context. And that is essentially a dictionary. So we're referencing keywords in that dictionary, directions, such as origin, destination, duration, and distance, and that's what's being rendered here. Then we've got directions, and we've got ID dir toggle. So this is JavaScript void href, and then we've got on-click directions toggle. So this is how you view the directions. It doesn't show the directions until you toggle it. Okay, so that's just a little link that we've got there. And then we've got another table. So we've got table head, directions, distance, duration, and this is where it renders the whole route. So for each leg in directions.route, we do a for loop and a counter, and then we do this for loop here with dist, duration, text. We're creating those variables that we can reference down here, and they are in leg.steps. So we're doing a for loop in leg.steps, creating 3 variables. Distance is there, duration is there, and text safe is there, because that is raw HTML that comes through from Google. And that's why we need safe, because it will actually render that HTML properly in the website. And that's it. That is maps. Okay, the next thing we need to do, they're all our HTMLs complete. We now need to add some CSS, which we'll do. I am not going to waste your time on CSS. This app tutorial was all about showing you Google APIs in Django. CSS is not an afterthought. It's very, very important. It makes it look fantastic. But, you know, we could spend an hour going through CSS, which isn't necessarily important. But you can see I'm referencing body. I'm saying that the font family for this particular file is Courier Prime, which is correct. The map route element. So this is what we just looked at here. Where is it? So map route. So we're referencing different elements in each of the HTML files. So we've got map container. So I've probably got one for, if I search, there you go, body HTML map container height 100%. Oh, I didn't need to search for that, it was right at the top. We've then got logo, we've got the side nav, so this shows you what the side nav will look like. And then we've got some media screens, so it depends on how big the screen is how it gets rendered. These are how the inputs look. So a text input, an email, a password input. We've got select text area. This is how it's rendered. This is how it looks. We've got width 100%, padding 12, so on and so forth. Okay, so we don't need to waste our time on this. So we won't. The next thing is the main JavaScript. So if I go into main, paste this, right at the bottom here, we've got code straight from Django. This is a JavaScript function to get the CSRF token from the cookie, and then it passes that through with an AJAX call. This is a workaround to make sure that the right CSRF token is passed through when a form is submitted. Okay, so it's very important you have that in your JavaScript file when you're submitting AJAX. So let's go right at the top of the file. Let's open it up a little bit. Right, directions toggle. If you remember in maps, I saw that directions toggle somewhere. Here you go. So we've got a little link here, and it says you click here to open up the route, basically, so you can see the route for the map, and it's on click, you call direction toggle, and all it does is it opens up, it removes the hidden attribute and adds a new element. So we don't need to necessarily go through the JavaScript itself, but that is what it's doing. When you click that toggle, it's calling this JavaScript function, and it's fading in the directions table, else you fade out. So you either display it or you hide it, one or the other. Show alert. This is for toaster. So we call show alert every time we make an AJAX call. And it depends on if it's a success or if there's a redirect, for instance. We pass through all of these keywords, keywords here. And if there's a redirect URL, then we call this toaster, else we call this toaster. So what it's doing is picking up the title. So in that case, it could be success. The message could be thanks for signing in. And it's creating a toaster. So if you look at the examples again, it's creating a toaster based on all of this. So if we had a close button, a progress bar, and then show test, so it's creating a unique toaster. And that's what I'm doing in the JavaScript there. Okay, so that's the function called show alert, show password. Okay, this is what's being called when you click on, let me open up, sign up. There you go. So show p word. Okay. So this is the JavaScript function that's being called. And what it's doing is if the type is password, change it to text. If not, change it back to password. Just a little toggle. Okay, we create a variable called temp button text. So this is the text that's on a submit button. So it could be sign up, sign in. So it kind of stores, or this will be used to store what a button is currently named. And then you've got a custom form submit post. So when we submit a form, what it does, it disables the button, it adds a spinner, and it saves the current text to this element. And then when it's complete, when the form is submitted and everything's gone well, we then call this. So it's custom form submit response. And then what it does, it removes the attribute disabled and it adds the text which it used to be. So the idea is when you submit a form, it adds a spinner saying loading, and then when the form's submitting, it goes back to sign up. That's all it's doing. And we just call custom form submit post and custom form submit response when we're calling Ajax. And then we've got form controls. So we use strict, but this is a variable form controls and it's equals function. So this is kind of a general JavaScript function that we're doing here. And underneath here is when we initiate the form controls. So it's a jQuery document ready. So when the HTML has been rendered, then we call the format controls and we initiate them. So everything within here will then work. So format controls, we've got a few forms. First one is user sign up. We've got sign in, user profile, and we return and we initiate and function. We initiate these forms. So each of them. So that's how they work. So we'll focus on one of them. So we've got one of these for each of the forms that we've created. Okay. So forms. So we'll look at user. It's the user form, which is the sign up form, right? Yeah. And we call that in, so we look in sign up, we look at the form, so it's sign up form, okay? So that's what we're referencing now. This is what we're trying to submit from the front end. So this is us submitting a form from the front end, processing it in the back end, and then changing the page as necessary. We're not reloading because it's an Ajax call. So this is the user sign up form. The form, so we create a variable form. Let me make this a little bit easier for you to see. Yeah, that's better. So we create a variable form. So that form is, we use an Ajax function there. So you little $sign ID sign up form. So the form is the sign up form that is in the sign up HTML. This was one here. Then we've got form.submit function. So this is when we submit the form, this is what we do. We prevent default. So if we click submit on a HTML form, it would just do its default function, which is to submit the form to the back end. By adding event.prevent default, it stops that from occurring. So it kind of completely stops that from happening. And then it goes through this piece of code here. Okay, so we've got custom form submit post. We're calling this. Remember, we're adding a little loader to the button. And then we've got Google reCAPTCHA ready. So we have already loaded that in this particular HTML document. That's this script here. So we can now access gReCAPTCHA. So gReCAPTCHA.ready function. So then what we do is gReCAPTCHA.execute. So we pass through the reCAPTCHA site key that is passed through at the bottom of this page. Okay. The action is / because this is the home page, right? So this is the index. So .then, the function. So this is the token. This is the token that we get from gReCAPTCHA, the Google reCAPTCHA. So document.getElementById, ID token.value. So this is the value of the token equals token. So that hidden element now has a value of the token. And then we submit that to the back end. So var form data equals form, which is here, serialize. We call the serialize function there. And then we make an Ajax call. Okay, so the URL is the form attribute action. Look at the form attribute is the sign up. Okay, main, method. So the form attribute method. We've then got post. So this is a post call. Post request, sorry. And then data, we're passing through the serialized form data. we've got a success method and an error method. So if anything goes wrong, right, we call the custom response, so form submit response. So the button on the form will go back to normal. Then we'll show an alert, which will be error. There was an error, please try again. And then we do a console log. That will only display if debug is true. Okay, if it's false, it won't show anything, but this will show an error if there is a problem. However, if it's a success, again, we call custom form submit. If the result equals success, because if you remember in the logic in the view, we're overwriting the form valid function. And if we show sign up view, so if it's a success, so if reCAPTCHA works, then respond with success. If it doesn't, then we will call, so if it's a form invalid, we'll call the form error method in the mixin. So if it's a success, we'll redirect to home page. If not, we redirect false. We basically don't do anything. Sorry, then what we do is we call the show alert. You can't really see that, can you? We show alert and we pass through the result of the call, the message, and then the result to lowercase. And then we pass through the redirect because we are redirecting to the homepage. Okay, so that is the sign up form logic in JavaScript. This is how we're processing the form on the front end. We're doing the same. So the reason I went through that in quite a lot of detail is because we're using the reCAPTCHA, whereas these other forms we're not. Okay, so there's no GReCAPTCHA at all. It's just basic. We're getting the form, we're creating form data, we're making an AJAX call with the attributes, action, method, and form data. We have got console log JSON. We don't necessarily need that. That's for testing. So this is the sign in function, the sign in form submission. Then we've got user profile. Okay, so this will be called when we click programmatically the submit button on the form in root. Sorry, it's in profile. My apologies. So it's the form in profile, the profile form. If you look, the button is disabled. You can't actually click the submit button. So what we do is we actually programmatically click that submit button when we get the response from Google. So we'll be submitting this form in JavaScript from the Google, where is it? In static from one of these. Probably Google Places API. So when we get the result back from Google, we will then remove the disabled attribute from the form button, and then we will click the button programmatically, like I say. So there's no different, nothing fancy going on here. They're all very, very similar, but they're the three forms and they are in the main.js. So let's save that. We've done the CSS, we've done the JavaScript. We now need to focus our time on the Google Maps, Google Places, and waypoints. Okay, now what we need to do is add the JavaScript to the Google Maps. Copy, paste. So let me open that up a little bit. Okay, so right at the top of the page here, we call this, so it's a get script, and we call maps.googleapis.com. We pass through the Google API key. And then at the end of that, we plus, and it's and libraries equals places. So this is the call that you need to make to have access to everything we need in Google Maps. And this is what's going to be used to render the map in map.html. So this will be the map with the route across the waypoints. Okay. So when done, so once it's got that script, .done, then it does this function here. So it's google.maps.event, add DOM listener, window, load, and then you initiate the map. Okay, so this is just a standard get script call for Google APIs. We've then got an init map function. Okay, so we have a variable of directions service and directions display, and then a variable of map. So we make a new Google Maps, and we're looking for map route. So this is the element that I showed you in the map HTML. So it's actually looking for this. This is where the map will be rendered. Okay. Zoom is 7. I can't even remember what that means. And then we center the map against the latitude A and longitude A. So that is the start point. So that is the center of the map. And then directions display, you set map and you set the variable map. and then you calculate and display route. So this is the directions service and directions display that we'll be referencing in this function down here called calculate display route. You've got some constants, so waypoints, this is the C and D, okay, stop over true. So this is how we're creating waypoints. And then we calculate the route using this function here. So we pass through directions service and directions display, okay, and that's what we're calling here actually. So when we calculate and display route, these are the two bits we're calling, which are here. So they're new, straight from Google Maps directions service. So we're pulling them through in here, directions service dot route. Origin is origin, and then we're passing through the destination and waypoints. These are the variables that we pass through, if you remember, to here. Okay, so origin, destination, and the waypoints are the constants here. Okay, that's what Google requires to render this map. So optimized waypoints equals true, travel mode is driving, and then we've got function response status. So if the status is okay, so if it works, then directions display set directions response, else fire off an alert. Okay, so that's how that works, and that is the Google Maps JavaScript. That's all we need to look at. Google Places API, and we'll paste that in there. Let's open it up, our wee little smidge. Again, we're doing another get script, same thing, no difference. The only difference is rather than init map, we're using init autocomplete, which is just a different service. Okay, so we let autocomplete, so we have that here, and then we have an init autocomplete function. So autocomplete equals, so we do a new google.maps.places autocomplete, and then we're looking for an element in the HTML, which is ID Google address. So if we look at profile, and it's here, ID Google address. So we're looking for that element, okay? Types is address, and component restrictions, so the country, this is where we pass through the base country, okay? So this is settings.base country, and this is currently set to UK, but if you send it in settings.py to a different country, then it should technically work, okay? So then we have autocomplete, add listener, change of places. So every time you change the address in the input, it will autocomplete, okay? So on place changed, so if you click the different address, then it will run through this piece of logic here. Okay, so the autocomplete, this is as you're typing, it will change and predict the addresses. But if you click the address, it will run through this code. So you've got the place, so it's autocomplete, get the place. Geocoder, you're doing some geocoding there. This is why we enabled that API. The address, so again, we're getting the value from the input that we just selected. And then we've got geocoder.geocode, pass through the address, and then if the status is okay, so if the address is fine, then we get the longitude and latitude from the response, and we add those to the elements that have the ID of ID underscore latitude and longitude. Okay, so those two inputs are now being populated. And then we go through this logic to get the street address, the route, the postal code, and everything else. And we add those to the corresponding elements. Okay, so I won't necessarily need to go through them, but we're doing a for loop on the response from Google, and we're pulling through the street number, the route, and saving it to the ID town, the county, the country, so on and so forth. Then we add the address to, we add the value to the ID address, and then we unhide all of the elements. So remember those, everything with a hidden element class gets unhidden. Lastly, we fade in, sorry, I do apologize. You find all of the hidden elements and ignore the CSRF token, and then you fade them in. So that's how that works. I do apologize. And then what you do, you get the profile button, you remove the attribute disabled, and then what you do is you submit the form. Okay, so we don't programmatically submit the form. We remove the disabled, and then the user can submit the form. That's how that works. So, okay, Google Places API, JS, that is that. And then if we copy over the waypoints quickly, we'll just fly through that. Happy days. Right, again, another get script. Difference being here, it's exactly the same as Google Places API. Okay, very, very, very similar. It's just this is slightly different because we are using this JavaScript for 4 different inputs. So we had to manipulate the JavaScript slightly to work. So instead of Google Places API's JS, where there is no auto fields, I've just got A, B, C, and D because we're just using 4 waypoints. So again, in it autocomplete. So I won't go through the logic of adding the address and town and county to the hidden elements, because we don't need to, or getting a longitude and latitude. But you will see here that what we're doing is we're going through a for loop of the auto fields, and we're getting A, and we're then looking for the ID Google address, and we're appending the field. So this then becomes the, if it's A, it becomes the destination, sorry, the origin. If it's B, it's waypoint 1. If it's C, it's waypoint 2. And if it's D, it's the destination. So this is the logic I had to put in here to use the Google API on 4 different autocomplete fields. So that's the init autocomplete, and then we've got a on place change. So again, it's the same as Google Places API. It's just I've had to adapt the logic to work through and identify the correct element based on the field from the auto fields. Okay, so we're passing through the A, B, C, or D, and we're looking for ID, Google address, ADDI. Okay, so that's what I'm doing. It's no massive change to Google Places API JS, but then we're calling calc route, which is down here. So this is the function that we're calling, and this is what we're using to create the URL query. Okay, so we're doing an encode URI component. So what we're doing is when we select those 4 waypoints, we end up creating a URL parameter, and we append it to the URL, and then this is actually quite key. And then what we do is we call window.location_assign, and then we redirect the user to the root URL, sorry, the map URL, and then we append the query. So the query would be something like lat A. It will be question mark. It'll start with a question mark, and it will be lat A equals 57.4, and long A, I hope this makes sense, would equals 45.66631, whatever, and then it will be joined with a bar, and then you do another one and another one and another one. So the parameter string will end up being quite cumbersome, but it will be appended to the URL, and the user is then assigned to the new URL with a parameter string. And then in the map view, so if we go to main, where are we? Main views. You can see that we're actually trying to pick up that parameter string. So if lat A is found in request.get.get, then we can do something with it. So that's what we're trying to do in the waypoints. Again, this code is going to be in GitHub, so you can have a good look and make sure you're familiar with it. But I hope that I've now gone through this deep enough so that you understand it without going too deep that I've actually lost you. So I will end this section here, and in the next section we will test the app and make sure it works perfectly, and that will be end of the tutorial. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next segment. Thank you. Bye. Hey everyone, it's Bobby from Decoding here, and in this section, which is the final section, I will be running through some debugging and just general testing of the application to make sure it works as planned. So let's jump straight into it. If you look at my screen, I've got my command prompt open, I've got my virtual environment fired up, and I'm in the correct directory. So at this point, if you were to follow the tutorial on Django docs, you would have been making some of these commands right at the start of the project, but I haven't done them yet. I haven't done them for a reason, actually. So what I like to do is get my teeth into a project and then start making the migrations rather than doing it right at the start. It's just a personal preference, really. So what we need to do is we need to make a few commands here. So first and foremost, we need to make migrations. So Python manage.py make migrations. This will make some migration py files and a cache of the model migrations and other bits and pieces, if it will work. Help if that was a full stop. Okay, so from human friendly import format timespan, no model names human friendly. So is that, let me have a look quickly. I have a funny feeling that we need to install, it's just called human friendly. So let's go pip install human friendly. Brilliant. Make migrations. There we go, that worked. Then what we'll do is we will migrate. So if we now open up Sublime Text, you'll see that we have a few extra files in here now. So we've got db.sqlite3, so that's for the database. So in users, we've now got a py cache, and in migrations, we should have, there you go, so you've got initial. So if we were to make a change to the model and then run migrations again, it would then, essentially, it would just create a new file, and it would make a list of all of the changes you're making and all of the amendments, all of the creates and updates and things like that. Main won't have, it will have the py cache, but migrations will be blank because we don't have any models, okay? So these are the migrations we made. You'd expect it to look like this. So it's got dependencies of the auth user model, which we have, that's the one-to-one field. And then you've got the ID, timestamp, date field, Okay, so that's what we've done by making migrations. If we now run server, so Python manage.py run server, hopefully we'll be able to see what the project looks like on our browser. So let's go Control-Shift-N to open up an incognito screen. Just level that off a little bit. And if we go localhost with port 8000, wonderful. I was hoping that was going to look like that. So you can see here that it's gone sign in ?next. Okay, so the accounts page has redirected us to sign in. Okay, so we haven't got an account, so we will sign up. There we go. So object has no attribute, recapture public key. So what have we done here? So if we go back into settings, right, okay, so we'll call this public key. Let me have a look at my other project to see what I did call it. So as we, there we go. So, and that one isn't secret key. We need to call that private key. So, okay, so that will now reset the server. I think that's now working. And if we go back, this is, you're seeing the screen here because we've got debug set to true. If that was set to false, you wouldn't be seeing it. There we have it. Right, that's all now working. So this is the sign up page. Okay, so let's go Bobby Stearman. Username Bobby at didcoding.com. Password, let's go P word. No, let's go password 12345. If I click show password, it will show that. Okay. 12345, and the reason it's showing that is because I'm toggling between a password field and a text field. Okay, so let's click sign up. You can see here the fact that we've got this recapture element at the bottom of the screen would suggest that it's actually working. So let's click sign up. Oh, it's too common, so you need to have a good password. So let's go Fred1. Can't assume that's going to be very. There we go. Thank you for signing up. So the fact that it come up with an error and it come up with a message shows that the form errors actually work in the mixin, which is fantastic. So now that we're signed in, we're now in the accounts page, which is the home page, right? If we're not signed in, it will redirect us to the sign in page. So the username is decoding, name is Bobby Stearman. Let's create a profile. So this is the not the reCAPTCHA, this is the Google Places JavaScript. So if I put 1, 2, 3, oh, okay, that's not working. Okay, that's not working. Inspect, console, failed to load resource. The server responded with status of 404. So Google Places.js cannot be found. Okay, interesting. So static Google Places, because it's Google Places. Is that right? Is that what we're referencing? Let's look at templates, and we'll look at profile. And what are we looking for here? Google Places JavaScript. So that was a mistake on my part, okay? So this is all part of debugging. So if we refresh the page, that will now go because that file has been changed, the name has been changed. So if we now go 1, 2, 3, this page cannot load maps correctly. Do you own this website? Interesting. Let me just debug this quickly. Okay, I figured out what it was. It was because I hadn't enabled billing on the API, and you have to do that for it to work. So go ahead and do that on your API keys. So if I now go 1, 2, 3, there you go, and then we'll click Buckingham Palace, and then it will unhide all of those hidden elements, and we'll click Update. Your profile has been updated. Wonderful. It should now, there we go. Brilliant. So user profile, if we click to that, you can change the address. So it's create or update, which is great. We've then got root. So these are the 4. So this is the start address, waypoint 1, 2, and destination. Let's see if this works. So I'm going to go with, okay, I know that address. I'm going to go with 1 Cherry Orchard. There we go. I will do another. I'll go 1 High Street, Streatham. There we go. No, not that one. 1 High Street, Streatham. We'll click on that one, and lastly we'll go with 1 Marketplace, Ely, UK. And now that I've completed all 4 waypoints, can you see this? So we've got map question mark, then we've got lat A, and then it's got long A, lat B, long B. See how that's created that parameter string? That's what's being used in the view, okay? So we go into the view in main. There we go. So it's picking up all of those from the parameter string, okay? So we've got start, destination, duration, distance, direction. That's about right, to be fair. If you're going to do that little route, that's exactly how far I'd expect it to be. This is the map. Sutton, Hadnam, Streatham, Ely. Brilliant. If we click on this, will this work? Happy days, and that's the directions. Let's just double check that sign out works. There we go. So let's check sign in as well. So it's Bobby at didcoding.com, and was it Fred1 I think I used. Check show passwords, sign in. You are now logged in. Everything works to plan. I'm over the moon. So there we have it. There's your Django app that works with 2 Google API keys and 6 different Google APIs, one of which is reCAPTCHA, and the others are a whole bunch of maps APIs. So we can do predictive addresses, we can use maps, we can use waypoints. It's fantastic, and it looks pretty good as well. So you can find this code on my GitHub. The GitHub repository link will be in the description. Thank you for watching, and I will be seeing you in the next tutorial. Thank you. Bye-bye.